Skylar finds herself at a crossroads in her marriage to James, a relationship she once considered strong and fulfilling. They have been married for 5 years and together for 7, having built a life with dreams of starting a family soon. At 26, she reflects on their happy times, envisioning a future with 2 boys and 2 girls, cherished by their families. However, the bliss she once felt has been shaken by her actions, leading her to seek advice on how to salvage the remnants of their union. The trouble began when Skylar developed an unexpected bond with Jaden, a 25-year-old delivery driver who worked for a major shipping company. Their paths crossed frequently at her office over nearly 2 years, and during those brief encounters, a spark developed. Though it was not overtly romantic at first, there was a chemistry that could not be ignored. Conversations that began as casual exchanges evolved into something more meaningful, creating a sense of excitement in her otherwise routine day. One fateful day, Jaden broached a personal topic, expressing an undeniable attraction to her. Surprised and somewhat embarrassed, Skylar confessed that she felt it too. This confession left her with a mix of emotions, stirring feelings of guilt and confusion. Despite her commitments to James, she found herself drawn to the idea of having a deeper connection with Jaden, which sparked dangerous thoughts. At home, things with James remained stable and loving. Skylar appreciated him as a husband, friend, and lover. Yet, the allure of having both a fulfilling marriage and an infatuation with Jaden led her to explore ideas that once seemed foreign and unthinkable. In her searches, she stumbled upon discussions about polyamory and open marriages. Although she initially dismissed these concepts, fearing they could disrupt her marriage and alienate their families, her curiosity lingered. Weeks passed, and while her married life appeared to thrive, her thoughts increasingly veered toward Jaden. She read a blog post from a woman who successfully navigated opening her marriage. Intrigued by this woman's experience, Skylar began to entertain the possibility of asking James if they could explore a similar arrangement. However, deep down, she wrestled with the fear that such a conversation could upend the life they built together. Skylar's heart was torn between the love she shared with James and the allure of a new connection with Jaden. As she pondered her next steps, she could not shake the underlying sense of regret for considering a path she once deemed foolish. The struggle to reconcile these conflicting desires has led her to seek guidance on how to navigate her emotions and hopefully restore the love and trust that formed the foundation of her marriage. Partners outside the marriage that they see 3 to 4 times per month have been part of a lifestyle that one blogger claimed has strengthened their marriage over 4 years. She noted that both she and her spouse are happier than ever, a situation that piqued my interest because it mirrored my own hidden desires. I felt a mix of fear and curiosity about this subject. One Sunday morning, as my husband James and I relaxed at home, scrolling through our phones and chatting, I decided it was time to bring up the topic of open marriages. I asked him directly, mentioning that I had come across an online post discussing the idea. James initially sought clarification, asking if I meant couples engaging in relationships with others outside their marriage. After I confirmed this, he expressed his strong distaste for the idea, calling it disgusting and asserting that those who wished to sleep around should simply get divorced instead. I attempted to inform him that the concept was gaining traction in the United States and various Western countries, but his facial expression made it clear he found the topic distasteful. Sensing his discomfort, I quickly shifted the conversation to avoid any potential conflict, as the last thing I wanted was to jeopardize the strong bond we had cultivated. A couple of weeks passed, and during a moment of closeness, after an intimate evening together, James caught me off guard. As I rested my head on his chest, high on the warmth of our connection, he suddenly asked, "Who did you have in mind when you brought up open marriages last week?" A knot tightened in my stomach at his unexpected question. I lifted my head, confused, and asked him what he meant. He explained that some research suggested that when a woman mentions the idea of an open relationship, it often indicates she has either already been unfaithful or has someone in mind. His revelation shook me to my core. I could see the concern in his eyes, and he noted that he could tell I was hiding something. Feeling cornered, I hesitated, then insisted that I had never cheated on him and would never do so. However, I also felt compelled to be honest about my feelings, so I mentioned that if we ever considered an open marriage, there was a co-worker, Jaden, whom I might consider. Curious, James pressed for details about this friend. I began to explain my interactions with Jaden, including the feelings he had expressed to me, though I kept my own feelings for him to myself. James's next words shocked me. He stated that, in essence, I had already cheated on him. Irritation welled up within me, leading me to firmly deny his claim. But he explained that my relationship with Jaden could be classified as an emotional affair. I had never encountered this term before and was baffled by the idea. As James elaborated, my frustration grew, and he suggested we pause the conversation for the night, as he needed to rest for work the next day. While he fell asleep almost instantly, I was left wide awake, plagued by thoughts. I grabbed my phone and researched emotional affairs, reading numerous articles about them. To my dismay, James was right. What I had with Jaden was dangerously close to, if not entirely, an emotional affair. Guilt wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, making it impossible to find peace of mind. Unable to sleep, I ventured downstairs to make some tea, and eventually, I dozed off on the couch around 4 a.m. At approximately 6:45 a.m., James woke me with a gentle kiss, informing me that he was headed to work and that I should start my day. I returned his kiss, emphasizing my love for him more than usual, my heart heavy with guilt over my feelings for Jaden. Days passed, and once again, James and I found ourselves lying in bed, basking in the afterglow of our intimacy. Out of the blue, he said he would be open to trying an open marriage if that was what I truly wanted. His sudden shift in perspective left me stunned, prompting me to ask why he was bringing this up now. James explained that he had been reflecting on our discussion and the dynamics of our relationship in light of my earlier question about open marriages. He seemed to be considering the idea more seriously than before, and I was left to process this new development in our relationship. He explained that he had been reflecting on our previous conversations and came to the conclusion that if we truly desired to explore an open relationship, it would be best to do so while we were still young. This was a time when we could fully embrace new experiences without feeling the weight of age or regret. I admitted that I was intrigued by the idea but made it clear that I would never want to put our marriage or the deep love we shared at risk. He was the most significant person in my life, and his importance to me could not be overstated. James responded thoughtfully, suggesting that if our love was genuinely strong, it would have the ability to withstand any challenges, including infidelity. I countered his point by stating that in the context of a mutual open relationship, infidelity would not apply since both partners would agree to the arrangement. Instead of engaging with my argument further, he simply declared that we could start considering our marriage as open right at that moment. I was caught off guard by his sudden decisiveness and urged him to slow down, emphasizing that we needed to set clear ground rules before proceeding any further. James clarified that he only had 3 basic rules in mind. First, we needed to inform each other in advance about whom we planned to sleep with and when. Second, we had to disclose the details of our encounters afterward, though he insisted we avoid graphic descriptions. Third, he insisted that protection must be used at all times without exceptions. I found myself agreeing to his stipulations, but I couldn't help but propose a couple more conditions of my own. I suggested that we keep our open marriage confidential and promise each other that these new relationships would not jeopardize our marriage, as our commitment to each other should remain strong. James, however, was resistant to these additional conditions. When I pressed him for a reason, he simply stated that he could not nor would not agree to those stipulations and did not wish to discuss it further. This reaction left me feeling uneasy, as it was uncharacteristic of James to be so closed off. Despite my worries, I cuddled up to him, and we fell asleep, but the conversation lingered in my mind, creating a sense of unease about the entire idea of an open relationship, almost as if he had some hidden motive. In the following month, I chose not to pursue the concept of an open relationship, and we continued our lives as we always had. During this time, I kept a distance from Jaden at work, only exchanging brief, surface-level conversations about the weather or how busy we both were. However, one day, Jaden expressed that he really missed our conversations and asked if something was wrong. I explained that I was simply busy with work and personal commitments, but in my mind, I wrestled with whether I should reveal my situation regarding the open marriage. Ultimately, I made the decision to share that part of my life with him. Looking back, I wish I could turn back time and undo that choice. It felt inappropriate to discuss such a personal topic in the office, so I invited Jaden to meet for a drink after work, and he readily agreed. We chose a local bar with an outdoor patio, perfect for enjoying the warmth of early spring. During our meeting, I disclosed the details of my open marriage and directly asked if he would be interested in pursuing a relationship with me. Without hesitating, he said yes, mentioning that he had been waiting for me to come around and had been respectful by not pushing the subject. He even confessed that he had been dreaming about me for months. Our conversation took on a flirtatious tone, and by the end of the evening, we agreed to meet the following day after work at his apartment for our first romantic encounter. I made it clear that I needed to leave by 6:30 p.m. to return home to James, who continued to be my utmost priority. That night, I returned home and prepared a lovely dinner for James. After we finished eating, I informed him about my earlier discussion and the meeting I had planned with Jaden the next day, making sure to check that James was still comfortable with our open marriage. James seemed taken aback by my announcement, responding with a simple, "Oh yes, okay, so you're going to meet him tomorrow." I confirmed this but reassured him that we could still call it off if he felt uncomfortable. To my surprise, he insisted that we should go through with it. We hugged, but I sensed a certain stiffness and distance in his embrace that felt different from our usual closeness. I attributed this to nerves over the situation. The rest of the evening was quiet. We didn't engage in much conversation since he was focused on his work, and I had my own tasks to complete. When bedtime arrived, I spooned with him, attempting to initiate some intimacy, but the air was thick with tension. I lay next to him, wanting to feel closer and more intimate. I made an attempt to initiate something more between us, but he sighed and told me he was just too tired and needed to get some rest. The next morning, when I woke up, I noticed that James had already left. He sent me a text saying he had an early meeting that he had totally forgotten to mention before. He added that he would see me later that night. This behavior felt different for him, but I brushed it off and went about my day, getting dressed and preparing to head to work. I chose a particularly cute outfit that day, knowing I had plans to meet Jaden right after I got off work. Throughout the day, I found myself texting James, but he didn't respond. The lack of communication made me wonder if I should just cancel my date with Jaden. I recalled my feelings and considered the possibility of telling you my story, something I really wish I had done earlier. Then, at exactly 4:17 p.m., I finally received a message from James. He expressed that he loved me and reassured me that he would see me that night. This text brought a wave of relief, and I took it as a sign to go ahead with my plans. I went straight to meeting Jaden, and the time we spent together was intense. It was enjoyable and exciting, though it didn't quite reach the satisfaction I typically felt with James. There were definitely no feelings of love in this encounter, but the sheer excitement and the thrill of doing something forbidden made it strangely fulfilling. After about an hour and a half, I left Jaden's place and got home just after 6:40 p.m. To my surprise, James had not yet returned. I welcomed this opportunity as it gave me time to take a shower and throw my clothes in the washing machine, hoping to erase any lingering scent of Jaden's cologne. I didn't want James to notice anything unusual. Despite feeling physically satisfied, a heavy sense of guilt, shame, and remorse settled in. I felt dirty and was caught in a deep internal conflict. I decided to prepare a quick but delicious dinner for James, lighting candles to create a romantic atmosphere. I wanted to show him how much I truly loved him and emphasized that my physical encounter with Jaden meant nothing. It was purely physical and certainly not a reflection of the love I had for him. My hope was that we would end the night making love, which felt like a sweet redemption after the events of the day. Some might think my actions were selfish, or even gross, but I made sure to use protection during everything I did with Jaden, so I felt a bit safer. However, as the clock struck 7:30 p.m., James still hadn't come home. I decided to give him a call, but it went straight to voicemail. Frustrated, I sent him a text informing him that I was home and that dinner was waiting. Hours passed, and I heard nothing from him. By 8:50 p.m., my worry was growing. I continued to call and leave messages, but I received no response. At around 9:30 p.m., I finally got a text from him saying not to wait up and that he would be home late. I quickly replied, asking where he was and who he was with, but he didn't respond. Exhausted, I fell asleep sometime after midnight. Later, I was jolted awake by the sound of the shower running in the spare bathroom. Curious, I got up to check but found the door locked, which was very uncharacteristic of James. I knocked, but he didn't answer. After about 10 minutes, James emerged with just a towel wrapped around him, casually asking how my night was. I replied that it was fine, but then he asked me directly if I had been intimate with Jaden. I felt uneasy with his use of that phrase and told him I preferred not to call it that, but I ultimately admitted that Jaden and I had been together. I then asked where he had been, as I could catch a whiff of perfume emanating from his clothes. When I pressed him for details about who he had been with, he nonchalantly replied that since they hadn't slept together, he didn't feel it was necessary to share her identity with me. His choice of words rattled me. It became clear that he was upset, and his tone hinted at a deeper issue. I then asked why he chose to shower in the guest bathroom. He responded that he would be using the guest bedroom and bathroom until I had undergone 2 STD tests. His words landed like a punch, leaving me crushed. I was stunned and replied, "What? This wasn't part of our agreement." I assured him that I had made sure Jaden and I used protection for everything we did. To that, he retorted, "Have you never heard of oral HPV or oral herpes? I'm not getting within 6 feet of you until you're cleared. You can consider this my version of safety. This can be considered my take on social distancing from my marriage." I was feeling incredibly upset and overwhelmed with emotion. I had been crying and confided in James about my desire to close our marriage. This was the last thing I had ever wanted to happen, and my heart ached with the thought of it. In response, James sharply told me that it was not going to happen, asserting that I had my turn and now it was time for him to have his. His words cut deep, and I continued to cry as he stated he needed to go to bed because he had an early meeting the next day. I felt completely alone, spending most of the night with tears streaming down my face, until I eventually fell asleep on the couch. When I awoke the next morning, I found that James had already left for the day. He had sent me a text message instructing me not to wait up for him. I tried calling him, but he didn't pick up. Throughout the day, I continued to send messages and left voicemails, but my attempts to reach him were met with silence. I was feeling sick with worry and emotionally drained, convinced that I had just destroyed my marriage. There were no deliveries scheduled that day, meaning I wouldn't see Jaden, my coworker. As the clock approached 4:30 p.m., I decided to call Jaden and ask if we could meet later that night. He agreed and noted that I sounded upset. I confirmed that I was indeed upset but insisted we could discuss it when I arrived at his place. When we met, I expressed my desire to end our relationship. I admitted to Jaden that it had been a mistake and that my heart truly belonged to my husband. He listened and understood the gravity of the situation, only requesting one last hookup. He assured me that after that, he would avoid any further personal interactions with me outside of work matters. After some hesitation, I agreed, and we proceeded with the encounter, which was brief and nothing more than a standard physical interaction that lasted less than 10 minutes. Afterward, he remarked that it had been terrible, saying I just lay there without any enthusiasm. I apologized, agreeing that it had been a huge mistake and clarifying that it was not his fault. I quickly dressed, gave him one last hug, and left his place feeling an overwhelming sense of sadness. Just before I left, Jaden made a comment about never understanding women like me. When I asked him to explain, he simply brushed it off with a look of disgust, leaving me feeling even worse. I drove home in tears, grappling with the reality that I had made a foolish choice that could cost me my marriage. James didn't come home until 1 a.m. that night, and my heart sank as I realized I had single-handedly ruined my life. The following day, James repeated his routine, leaving before I woke up and sending me another text to say not to wait up for him. The emotional distance between us felt suffocating. I cherished the time spent with my husband in the mornings, evenings, and weekends, preparing meals, cuddling, taking long walks after dinner, and engaging in light-hearted conversation about trivial things. All of that felt like a distant memory, and I missed it more than words could capture. I texted James, requesting to talk the next morning. He agreed, but only if it was first thing, as he had plans for the day. I inquired about where he was going, but he didn't respond. James didn't return until 1:30 a.m., and I lay in bed silently crying, feeling the weight of my poor decisions. He came home, took a shower, and went straight to bed without a word. I woke up early the next morning, determined to talk. When he entered the kitchen around 7 a.m., pouring himself a glass of orange juice, the atmosphere was cold and devoid of emotion. He avoided eye contact and sat down at the table, staring at his phone while I sat across from him. In an effort to break the tension, I got up and sat on his lap, gently urging him to look at me. When he turned away, I took his face in my hands, forcing him to meet my gaze. I confessed my love for him, expressing that my earlier decision had not just been a mistake, it had been a terribly misguided choice. I apologized profusely, saying I would do anything to earn back his trust and love. He remained silent, looking at me as if I were losing my mind. I asked directly if he still loved me, but he offered no answer, which sent me into tears. I promised him I could make everything right, to which he replied that he didn't think that was possible. At that moment, in a fit of frustration, I called him a bastard, accusing him of planning this fallout and setting me up for a divorce. He denied that, but admitted that after I had mentioned the possibility of an open marriage, he sensed that our marriage might be headed for an end. He understood that our marriage was likely finished based on what he had read. So, I decided to confront him by asking why he didn't just tell me to cut off all contact with Jaden. His response was blunt: "You can't force someone to be faithful. You either are, or you're not," and it was clear that I was not the kind of person who could be monogamous. This statement hit me hard, and I felt tears streaming down my face as I insisted that I was monogamous and pleaded with him not to throw away our relationship. He simply remained silent, got up from his seat, and announced that he was leaving. When I asked him where he was going, he told me he'd return after midnight. I reminded him that the next day was Easter Sunday and that we were supposed to leave by 7 a.m. to visit my parents' house. My family adored him, and we made it a point to spend nearly every holiday together, especially since his parents lived in Florida. He firmly told me that he wasn't going. My heart sank in shock and devastation, and I begged him to please come with me, but he coldly refused. When I asked him what I should tell my parents, he expressed that he didn't care and suggested I simply tell them the truth. I continued to plead with him, hoping to change his mind, but he just got dressed, grabbed a gym bag filled with clothes, and walked out the door. Inside, I felt completely broken and utterly deflated, as though I had lost a vital part of myself. In this moment of despair, I decided to reach out for help, seeking any suggestions or steps I could take to salvage my marriage. I was eager to hear from others who had experienced something similar, particularly those who had navigated open marriages, and whether it was truly possible for a couple to recover after such a profound betrayal. I longed to connect with individuals who had successfully reconciled after navigating the complexities of an open relationship. I appreciated everyone who was there to listen to my story, but right now, I needed to retreat to bed, to cry alone for the rest of the day. Update 1. I wanted to share an update with everyone, especially those who offered their feedback and support. It really helped me get through the challenging last few days. While many people justly criticized my actions and called me hurtful names, I recognized that I deserved it, and I appreciated the honesty. Easter Sunday and the days that followed turned out to be some of the most difficult I've ever experienced. When I drove to my parents' house, they were quick to ask about James. I lied, telling them he had a work emergency and couldn't make it. I chose to say this because I didn't want to disrupt the family gathering. Although my family accepted my story at first, they grew suspicious as the day progressed. I found myself not texting or calling him as I usually would, so to divert their attention, I sent fake texts and pretended I received replies from him. I told everyone that he was still busy at the office and would call me the next day. The painful truth was that he never reached out to me, not even to check if I had arrived safely. This realization shattered my heart. I had planned to stay at my parents' house and finally tell them about the troubles in my marriage on Monday. Dreading that conversation, I anticipated their anger and disappointment. When I eventually admitted the truth, it played out just as I had feared. They yelled at me, hurled terrible names, and expressed their disappointment, insisting they hadn't raised me to behave this way. My sister was called in to join the conversation, and she proceeded to scold me as well. I broke down in tears, expressing my sincere apologies. I acknowledged my terrible mistake and insisted that I had learned from it, promising never to let it happen again. My sole focus for the time being would be to win back James's love and trust. Despite their anger, my parents told me they loved me and that they would pray for the restoration of my marriage. On Monday evening, I drove home, feeling the weight of sadness. I had called and texted James throughout the day, but there was no reply. When I arrived home, I discovered a note on the counter stating that he had gone to Florida to visit his parents and would be back on Sunday. This filled me with even more regret, as we had planned to visit them together in early May, and now that trip wouldn't happen because of my actions. I loathed myself for what I had done. That's all I can express for now. I am consumed by deep sadness and depression. What frightens me the most is that I have stopped crying. The pain and remorse I feel are so profound that tears seem pointless now. It has been almost a year since my last post, and at that time, I didn't intend to write again. However, I have received such a strong response and support from the community that I felt it was important to share an update. There are both unfortunate news and some positive developments to discuss. First, let's address the bad news. I am officially divorced. The divorce was finalized back in December. After much consideration, James, my ex-husband, decided that he could not stay married to me after I had a brief relationship with another man. He expressed that he felt he could never trust me again and that he was embarrassed to be seen with me in public. He mentioned that the divorce somehow restored his sense of masculinity. I have a different perspective on that. I believe he never truly lost his masculinity in the first place. The details of my short connection with Jaden are known only to our families, so it's not something that is widely discussed. But regardless, that's part of the past now. Now, for the good news. Actually, it's fantastic news. James and I have started dating again as of last month. We reconnected on Valentine's Day, and it has been an incredible experience. We currently see each other about once a week, but the level of passion between us is far beyond what it was when we first became a couple 7 years ago. James has made it clear to me that this renewed relationship will only be physical, and that we will never return to being married, living together, or being a traditional couple again. While I wish that things could be different, I am willing to accept the situation for what it is, even if it is not exactly what I truly want. My ultimate goal is to win back James completely, and if that doesn't happen, I still have a desire to have children with him. I want to clarify that I would never want to trap him into having a baby he doesn't want. Instead, I genuinely have thought about how we could share custody and create a family without being married. It may sound a bit unusual, but my feelings for James run deep, and I cannot imagine having children with anyone else. I realize that pursuing this could potentially affect any future relationships I might have with other men, but my heart is set on James. That's the update for now. I may not post again unless something significant occurs, but I would love to hear your thoughts on my situation. Do you think I am making a mistake by dating James again? Should I instead focus on moving forward and finding another partner to start a family with? Just to be clear, Jaden is not an option for me. He was a mistake that I have no intention of repeating. Thank you for reading and sharing your feedback.